Hi, I'm Kickstarter, and you're listening to the Solo Nerdbird podcast. Today, I'll be speaking with the creator and writer Ari Gross, here to promote the first issue of his new comic series, Upkeep, now live on Kickstarter until September 15th. Welcome back, Ari.
Thanks for having me. Always great to be back.
Right. So, outside my introduction, and for new listeners, who is Ari Gross in his own words?
Who is Ari Gross? Ari Gross is some dude who writes comics. I'm in Toronto, originally from Montreal. If you're Canadian, that might mean something. If not, those are just two cities in Canada. Uh, I've I've started writing comics about 5 years ago. Uh, a story I really wanted to tell that eventually became Wardens, which the first issue of which I launched a Kickstarter campaign for in February, and it was successful. And we're currently creating the second issue right now. And that one story sort of snowballed into I just kind of want to write comics. Like it became more of like I have a story to tell, and more like I just want to learn how to be really good in this medium and create cool stories and just see how this is done. So I've kind of gone pretty deep. I think I've done in the past 4 years about 10 short stories, a bunch of propped up in anthologies. I've actually got another one coming in anthology that's going to start around mid-September. I forget the exact launch date, maybe 16th or something. I can mention that after. It's called Sinister Compulsions. But yeah, right now, the thing I've been working on, I think I've been working on Upkeep for about 2 years. It's a story I want to tell about an issue that a lot of people like really seem to connect with. It's about housing, trying to find a house currently in Toronto and many other places, like not just Toronto, but I'm talking about Toronto because that's where I am, and that's the issues. Like you walk around the neighborhood, you can see like a falling apart house being sold for like $2 million, like no joke.
Wow.
So like there's a real issue with like housing prices and people trying to get stuff, and there's been a huge influx of immigration in Canada, and the housing policies to actually develop the houses or to allow certain types of houses to be built are just not there. It's been a whole like massive like political thing. Probably going to be a big issue in the next election. The conservatives are going to blame immigrants. The liberals are going to blame everybody but themselves who've been in the power for the past 10 years. It's going to be kind of dirty and probably really nasty, but I don't want to deal with any of that large political stuff. I just want to deal with the like, how does it feel for people who are trying to find a place to live, trying to find, an apartment or ideally like a house, like a freehold, a piece of property to own, and they can't get it. And what you end up happening is you end up having a magical murder mansion that you then have to deal with, and well, the story of Upkeep kind of goes off from there.
Uh-huh, uh-huh. Yeah, it is really crazy. It's like, um, I don't know if you have this issue in Toronto, and I'm pretty sure you do. I'm pretty sure it's probably everywhere where people are working full-time jobs and have probably do have two income household, but actually are still like living in their car or they're going from place to place. And it's like, you know, working 40 hours or like maybe even like I wouldn't say 60, maybe even 60 hours a week, and you still can't afford to live anywhere because
Oh yeah.
here where I am, I mean, it might be all over the US. I'm not sure. I just know in the state of Maryland, it's like this, where you have to make three times as much as the rent in order to live there. So which is crazy. So like if you want to live in a studio, which is $1,200, you gotta make like 36, almost four, just to rent the place out, which doesn't make any sense to me. Because
No,
like,
it you're 100% right. The
yeah,
cost of living is like up here and people's wages are over here. I mean,
yeah, it's
I was going to put a graph in the back of the book because everyone loves graphs, but like the cost of living has just gone right up, and the actual wages, adjusted for inflation, everything have gone very slightly up, and there's a massive gap. I mean, that's the major issue for housing. And I mean, the general cost of living crisis is the fact that you might be getting a slightly more of what you received 10 years ago if you work let's say you work a regulated union job, standard increases, to scale, even if it checks with inflation or whatever. That doesn't actually like match the actual physical cost of living, but the cost of like buying food has essentially doubled in 10 years.
mhm.
Or at least that's what it seems like to me. I mean, I have like massive sticker shock when I go buy stuff, and I'm just like, yeah, like how much is it? I feel like I'm that old man who'd be like, this used to cost a nickel. But like, and my salary like hasn't like doubled magically in 10 years. That's, and most people's haven't. They've gone up according to, something else, but everything just costs more. And housing in particular is one of those things because you have a lot of, I mean, there's a lot of reasons for why the price of housing is expensive in big cities. A lot of it's large population, low demand, people not building a lot. There's a few things to be said about regulations, and in some places are better at building faster, some places aren't. There's a lot of NIMBYism, a lot of people being like, I like my single unit home. It's like, I want to put up a condo next door. Can I make it 20 stories? No, down to 8 stories. Well, that does something, but there's a lot of condos being built in Toronto that are all for single units, which are essentially basically overseas investments, or not just overseas, but that was what a lot of it was. It's changing a bit now, but just basically a place for someone to put their money, but not a place for someone to live. Like someone might buy a 1-bedroom condo, but like you're not going to hold that forever if you're going to move out, and because you meet somebody and you want to have a family, you want to have like two kids or whatever. Like you could raise them in a 1-bedroom condo, but you probably don't want to. Like it's pretty tight.
Yeah.
And I mean, this whole thing extends for renting as well. I mean, the cost of rental has gone up. There's this website, Blog.to that occasionally just posts like disaster rental things that people put on like Craigslist, where there's just like a bed in a kitchen, and someone's like, "This is $1,000." I mean, like it's $1,000 for like a bed in your kitchen. Like that's insane. Like, yeah, I don't know, man.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's like if I could afford 3 times as much, I would just put a down payment on a house. Like, what are you talking about? So,
Yeah. Oh yeah.
um, but what is, I mean, I guess the title kind of speaks for itself in a way, but what is Upkeep actually about?
Sure. So Upkeep is about a couple, kind of where me and my wife were about 10 years ago, after the birth of our first kid. So they have a kid who's 6 months old. They're living in a sort of kind of a cramped apartments at the top of like one of these homes that got cut up and like 10 different apartments in the home kind of thing. Which is definitely, you see some of these nice homes around town and you're like, that's a nice home, and then you walk in, you're like, oh, this has been subdivided all to hell, and like it's completely unsafe. Like nothing here is very safe.
Uh-huh.
uh, and really small and just really shitty. So it's about people living in a situation, and they're like, the husband is like, he came out of grad school, he's sort of looking for a job, he can't really find his footing. The wife's got a good job, she works in the finance industry, she's making money, but even with that, there's no way that she can like save up enough to get a house. Like they're still getting, they see these places that are the dream houses and they can't afford them. They're just priced out of the market, even with their savings. It's a very middle class story. Like if everyone remembers Wardens is a very working class story. Upkeep's a very middle class story. These people are in sort of a different economic bracket, a different stage in their life, a different physical place within Toronto. They're not in like, the working class neighborhood. They're in a neighborhood that's like fairly affluent and they want to stay there, but they know there's no way they can stay there if they want to move out of their like tiny apartment. And also they have a shitty ass neighbor, and they need to get a house basically. So through a series of, maybe not a series, through Yvonne and Adam, those are the two main characters. Yvonne gets a thing on her phone, finds out that hey, there's this competition for entering a bid for a house. It doesn't say anything about the house. It just says that it's the best house in Toronto, and just put in a bid. Eventually, Adam puts in a bid. He ends up getting it. He puts in $0, which doesn't expect to get it. And they're now owners of this magical house. This house exists whenever you cross this old river called Garrison Creek, which doesn't exist anymore. This is a river that was buried in the late 19th century in Toronto and runs along the West End. So there's a lot of like local geography put into this as well, which is just sort of a thing of mine. In Wardens, I talked a lot about that community. Here I want to talk about a different part of Toronto, just sort of dig into what it means to actually live in a place and the history of that place. Anyway, so this magical house will give them anything they want in the world, anything that really exists. If they want the like 100 Mona Lisas, they got 100 Mona Lisas, no problem. The only thing is this house requires occasional upkeep, which is it wants you got to take someone take them into the house, send them down the basement. And the worse the person is, the worse things they've done, the more wicked they are in their heart, the longer the house will be happy with you. And if you don't do what the house wants and you don't eventually give the house its upkeep, the house is going to turn on you and it's going to be a pretty bad time. So they sort of get locked into this bargain where it's this magical mansion that can give them anything they want. They just have to figure out how they're going to square this, essentially the sort of blood sacrifice they have to. I mean, it's really the husband who's sort of on the hook for it. Although, throughout the story, there's we're going places with it, but yeah, it starts out with it's more focused on him having to be like, I now have to do this thing and I have to figure out how to do this. And I'm not like a killer. I'm not a person who sacrifices people to a house, but he's got to figure out how he's going to do that if they want to keep their place. And the beauty of Upkeep is that every issue is 1 year later. So I wanted to tell the story not of issue 1, people get a house, then issue 2, they're still living in it. But Upkeep isn't for another month. I want Upkeep to be something that he has to do about 1 to 2 years. So it's something that it's a regular, kind of like house upkeep. It's like you got to do it regularly. You don't have to do it every day, but if you don't do it regularly, bad things are going to happen. So I want this to be a story where at the beginning, it's the two of them. They have a young kid. By the end of it, their kids, let's say it goes 20 issues. That's sort of the rough plan. I want to tell the story of their kids growing up in this place of weird privilege, this kind of magical mansion that can give them anything they want. They're numb to so many things in the world. They're almost what does that do if you can have anything? Does that make you spoiled? Does that just put you above everything? I want to sort of dig into that, them growing up with this sort of uber privilege, but it's kind of a secret because they can't, just tell anyone and, bring anyone they want into the house all the time and stuff. There's some rules about it. So I want to tell a story about growing up in a weird magical place with the darkness underneath it. And one of the other main things about Upkeep is so to have something in general in the world usually means that, to have something at, let's say, a good value, to buy something, if I want to buy this shirt, I buy this shirt for a reason, what I think is a reasonable price. Probably someone or several people got paid a lot less than what are probably reasonable wages to create this thing. Most economic interactions we have are not equal economic interactions between sort of, people of similar economic power. Most economic interactions are usually someone who has something pays money to someone who doesn't have as much stuff, or maybe it's through a company, or eventually the trickle down doesn't usually hit the people who are doing the stuff. So I kind of wanted to take the idea that we benefit, as a culture, as a society, we benefit, the people who benefit usually at the expense of somebody else. It could be at the expense of, North America, the people were here before, that no longer, have complete dominion over this land. It could be that the expense of, someone in a different country who's working for an extremely inequitable company, paying them, essentially, minimum wage or worse for slave labor conditions to create, disposable products. I want to take sort of all of that inequality of the world and put this down into condense it and make it super immediate. Because for Adam, the main guy, to get the house, he's got to do something to some person directly. I want to make that sort of inequality, him have to face it and own up to it and being I have to do this thing. And it's okay if I do it, but he can rationalize it to himself. A house gives you a longer span of peacefulness, of happiness, the worse a person is. So the idea is you want to take the worst people you can and sort of sacrifice them to their house. So there's this kind of inbuilt self-rationalization, but I want to make that immediate and sort of play off those themes. That's a long ass rant.
No. It when I saw what you were writing and reading up on it on the page, it immediately made me think of it's sort of similar in, I guess, in a way, is the movie Parasite in a way. And then I thought of The Last of Us. So I don't know if you see these memes or if you've been asked this question, these hypothetical questions of what are you willing to do? So say we'll let you live in this house or in this mansion for like a year, but you have to give up something. You know, you have to give
Mm.
up your phone, you have to give up technology, or you have to be here by yourself for a year, right? So like, what are you willing to do to live a life of comfort, a life of ease? And how I correlated that with The Last of Us is I remember listening to a podcast where these guys, they're husbands and fathers, and not to spoil it for anybody who is not familiar with The Last of Us, they were talking about Joel's um
Like the
decision.
ending.
Yeah, pretty much
Yeah,
the ending.
yeah.
Yeah, Joel's decision and like the aftermath of that and Ellie's choice and lack thereof, I should say.
Mm.
Um and they're they I guess they're complaining about um being asked all the time, if you were put in a situation, if you were Joel, what would you have done? You know, would you have made the same decision? Would, you know, if you had grown attached and had this relationship with Ellie, you know, would you have done the same thing or whatnot, whatever? And they're like, I don't want to think about ever being put in that position. Like, I don't ever want to think about having to make that decision with my daughter or with my family. So it I thought of like Adam having to make this decision for his family just so they can live a life of comfort and a life of ease to get away from, you know, this shitty abusive neighbor and, you know, living in a cramped space. They want to give their child space and maybe even have more children possibly.
Yep.
That could be something you could discuss at some point too. Um, so yeah, it made me think of that, like all those hypotheticals, like what are you willing to do to have this thing that you want? In this case, it has to be a blood sacrifice. So,
Yeah, that's exactly it. I mean, I think the tagline I have is like, who would you kill for your dream house?
mhm,
You know, it's just like, what would you do basically? And I think a lot of people, if they had the option of, like this guy, I can have a mansion that gives me anything, and I have to give it the worst people in the world. Okay, well, let me find the worst person I can find. Okay, this guy's done all these bad things. This person's a very bad person. Yeah, I can take this person out. Like, and I deserve it. I think a lot of people have these. I mean, The Last of Us is especially hard hitting because it's like the stakes are so high, right? And
mhm,
the personal relationship is so close. Where this almost eases into it. The harder thing, if I wanted to make an even harder story, would be like, the better a person is, like the longer you get. But that's kind
mhm,
of not what I wanted. I wanted there to be a bit of ambiguity also for like, you can even explain the houses. You have to take the worst people out, so the house must be a good thing, right? This house is a gift from. Some people might interpret it as being a gift from God. It's this divine thing that helps benefit you and society by removing the worst or whatever. Like there has to be some sort of self rationalization. I feel for this, the way that, especially in the first issue, where like like he's got to do upkeep, so it continues. Like if it doesn't, there's no more story. Other
mhm.
like he could just leave the house or they could all die or something, right? But like no, it's going to be a long story. Uh, so yeah, like I really like playing around with those issues and the fact that it's one thing for Adam to be like, fine, if I take this guy out and I know this guy's an asshole, that's one thing. But once you get more into the story, Adam's going to things are going to weigh on him, and he's going to wonder if he's making the right choices. And sometimes there's going to be people who get taken out who maybe is not so happy about that. So I'm trying to figure out ways to like to play with the guilt that people can have having these things, and the way that people at the end of the day rationalize that guilt and put it out of their mind, being like, okay, well, I've got all this great stuff, like real life people, I've got all this great stuff, or even I've got some great stuff. I know it comes at the expense of really bad things. I know this is bad for the environment. I know this is bad for like global inequality, but still $5, like for this, like what are you gonna do? Like
Yeah,
it's yeah.
yeah, exactly. It just like it just makes me think of something I say all the time is that, and even I don't like it when I say it, but it's the person that you hate the most or who you think is the worst person ever, there are people that love them.
Mm,
So, you know, you're bullying in school, that person that assaulted you, or this person that stole from you, or whatever it may be, the worst thing they've ever done, you, like I said, they might be the worst person in your eyes, but to somebody out there, they maybe even like they don't have any next of kin, but it's that one person. I remember during the pandemic when there were no homeless people on the street at all. And um I only noticed because I'm so used to seeing the one person on the corner when I'm going to work. And I'm like, where is he? I
Right.
don't know his name. I've never really interacted with him before, but I'm so accustomed to seeing him that I actually started to
Yeah.
like,
Where's
yeah,
that guy? I know that guy. He's not
yeah.
here. Where is
So
he? Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
where is this guy?
Yeah.
So he could be the worst person to somebody, but for a little bit of time, for me, I mean, I didn't love him or anything like that, but for a second, I cared about him. So there are people out there who care about these people as much as you hate them, or as much as Adam tries to rationalize their worst behavior just for the blood sacrifice, so he could have this house for him and his family.
Yeah. I mean, that's a totally interesting point, is that, everybody loves somebody, and
Mm,
everybody is loved by someone, even if you can't understand, even if that relationship makes no sense to you. I mean, there's legitimately very many extremely popular people in the world. I'm like, how does anyone like this guy? Like, can point to like a great number of politicians, a small number of very specific politicians, but like certainly, or any, people like, really, this guy, this is the guy you're into. Someone's like, yeah, okay, like I don't get it, but okay, that's you, I suppose. It's interesting because on the one hand, there's the relativity of like just the ethical relativity of, is anything actually matter? If someone does something, is it worse than if someone does something different? But I kind of want to make a strong thing with the house and say, like, the house knows and has some objective metric of good and bad,
mhm,
which I think is interesting because I don't normally include that in my stories. It's not interesting for other people. It's just interesting for me because I'm like pretty hardcore social relativist, like when it comes down to it. Like in terms of like, I don't believe that there exists a good or bad independent of human action. I think that's something that people put onto things, and I think good and bad are defined in terms of the way our aesthetics about the world, either a utilitarian view, like this is good for this is bad for that. But like in the book, I want the house to, like, they know if you've been bad. And if you've like if you've gone around kicking puppies and stabbing orphans or whatever, like, you're objectively a bad person, and the house is going to give you give the owners more time for you, as opposed to someone else who's lived a good life, and the house might not even want them. I kind of want the house to be choosy and picky.
mhm.
And you can't just like grab anyone off the street and bring them to the house. The house would be like, no, man, that person's like kind of fine. Like, find me someone real bad, someone I can really sink my teeth into.
Yeah.
So it's interesting, and I have plans later for someone who actually to engage with that. And like, the one thing about the house too is I don't spell out uh anything about the origin of the house, or I want to leave it like total mystery, at least at the beginning. How did this come to be? All he knows is he got it from the previous owner, and that's it. The house will not tell you anything about itself, and that's like something that Adam's going to learn as he tries to research the house. The house is pretty tight-lipped about what's going on with it, and anything that refers to it, it tries to make itself unknown, except to its owner, but like it doesn't want to have a lot. It doesn't want the heat. You know what I'm saying?
Mhm.
So I think doing that, you can have the house be 1,000 years old. You can have the house be 100 years old. You can have the house be 40 years old. You can have different histories, but I want the house to be at least a couple 100 years old, and to be able to tell stories as concurrently as I'm telling this. Upkeep, and if it takes off, if people back it, we'll tell this longer story about this one family. But I want to be able to dip into the history of it, and talk about someone investigating it in the 1940s,
Mhm.
as someone who, a family who lived there in the 19th century. Maybe it's maybe an escaped soldier from the old Fort York garrison, like the British garrison, that runs across the river in like the 1790s and finds it. Like, I want to be able to dig back and tell these different kinds of use it almost as like I don't know, I'm sure there's a word for this, but a thing that you center lots of stories around, you know, the sort of a means. There's a comic called Silver Coin, where everyone who picks up the silver coin is cursed. And at the end of the issue, the silver coin rolls along, goes to someone else, and someone tells a totally different story with it. I kind of want the house to be a little bit like that, where you can tell stories about, you know, of greed, of sacrifice, of you know, of desire, of willing to struggle with yourself. But you know, it's all related to this one mansion that will give you anything you want, you know. So I think it's cool, like a way to jump off and tell these different stories. And I definitely want to dig into the history. If this were like a monthly comic, my idea would be, which it isn't, it's probably like an annual comic because, you know, indie comics.
Uh-huh.
It would be like, you know, if I did like 12 or 10 years of like, or whatever, you know, like 6 years of like telling the story, then you would have like an annual or something that would tell a total separate story, something that's detached from the rest, that just digs into the history of the house. That just tells a one-off of like, you know, some guy in the 1870s or something like that. So there's lots of stuff you could do. Uh, and I like the idea of, you know, having this thing that's old and no one really knows much about it or why it's here. It is what it is. And slowly I can, if I want, I can build out the mythos, or maybe I don't want to build out the mythos. Maybe I just want to keep it tight, all about the family, and let people know only a little bit more every time, if that, just to keep the mystery going. I'll have to see how it works out with the writing, you know?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, you could just stick with this, like you said, just stick with this family and then move on to the next one and just tell from the experience, tell the story of the origin or the mythos behind it with each family, with each experience, maybe. So, but
Yeah, there's lots of storytelling options, that's for sure. Yeah.
mhm. But as artists and writers, we always have stories floating around in our heads. Some stick as whole stories, and others are just cool scenes we add on, into an existing draft at some point. So, how long have you had Upkeep formulating in your head, and what was the break you needed to finally follow through on it?
So Upkeep really started about 2 years ago. I went with my wife to visit her in-laws. Her
Mhm.
in-laws live in a multi-generational home in Burnaby, BC. Excuse me, which is a suburb of Vancouver. Vancouver is just the next city east, like literally just there's a street you cross here in Burnaby, and they're in an extremely suburban part, which is pretty different than where I live. I live like in Toronto and Little Italy. I am literally a I want to say 5 second walk to two pizza places. And I live across the street from a bar. Like I live like in the action in terms of like just being in a city. Uh, but they live in a big house. It's multi-generational, so they have like the parents are on one floor. Candace is my wife, her brother, and his kid and his wife are on another floor. So the kid like goes up and down between the floors. And it's very cute, you know. But it's a total different style of living, and I was kind of like, we went there just to visit them a couple years ago, and there was a massive heat wave that hit Vancouver, and so like you couldn't go outside because you would just roast. And then everybody got COVID. Like half the people got COVID, and half the people probably also got COVID, but just didn't have symptoms. So that
Mhm.
everyone's like stuck in this house that doesn't have air conditioning because people didn't have air conditioning typically in Vancouver. They got it like 2 weeks after we left. And so we're just stuck in this crazy house that's like really hot and you can't go outside. And I was just thinking about like houses. And so every night what we would do is we would wait until like we would sleep during the day basically and try to like get through being sick. And then at night when the sun went down, we would just walk around their neighborhood, which was like mansion after mansion because they live in a place that has these huge houses, like I don't know, like $5-6 million like big mansion, like at least like some of them are just giant. Like there's a singer Michael Bublé. He owns a block there. I don't. It's just like obscene amount of like I don't live near big places because I live like in the city where houses are typically small. So I started thinking about like huge houses, and there's one house that had a giant hedge. It was must have been like 8 feet, 18 feet tall or something, like this huge hedge that just went around the whole thing. It was like perfectly manicured. And I was like, what is it like to be on like the other side of this hedge? And so then that got me thinking about like have like what would you do to like have like these huge mansions, these giant places that like, you know, I would never like they don't like I couldn't afford them for starters. But second of all, they're not really suit my lifestyle. Like it's not like he the closest place to where they live is like a Costco, and the closest place to where I live again is like a pizza place. So like it's a different if it's just like urban versus suburban, and I was just sort of hit with like an overwhelming like intensity of like suburbia, and it just made me think about like the things people would do to get a big house, and then I don't know, I was probably just lying, probably like sick with COVID, just be like, what if you had to kill a person to get a big house? And somehow that turned into this. And once I get an idea, I get a lot of ideas, like a
Mhm.
lot of people I'm sure who are writers or creatives get like tons of ideas. A lot of them are really bad upon further inspection. Like there's so many times I've opened my phone and been like, first of all, I can't even read it because my swiping through these words, my voice attacks garble something unintelligibly. And second of all, like this is really dumb. But this is one of those ideas that stuck. So I was like, okay, this is good. And once you have it, then you start building, and then eventually a story. I find for me with stories like they tend to build in my head until it reaches a critical point of them like, okay, well you just kind of got the story now. Like the only thing that obviously I don't have the details, and the details are always going to change, but the basic essence of the story, like once I have that, I'm like, okay, well I just got to start writing it. And I also wanted to write a story to do something between Wardens, because I knew that Wardens, it's a 44-page comic. It's going to take my artist a while to do it, even though like he's pretty good at it. Second issue is going faster than the first, but it's got a long time. And I was like, I want to have more than one story I'm telling, and I wanted to do a horror story too, just or something that's a horror story and a family drama, just to tell like total different issues than the ones I'm dealing with at Wardens. The Wardens are dealing with questions of like labor issues, gender issues. Like it's a very working class comic. It's people trying to with a lot of religion in there, a lot of sort of spirituality. None of that's in Upkeep. It's quite different. It's just dealing with a whole other set of issues. Ones that I was like, I want to talk about those too, and this is my lens to talk about them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I remember I went to dog sit my cousin's her dog, and for like 10 days or something like that, which it was a really long time. I like to be back home in like maybe 3 or 4 days. I don't like being
Mm,
away from home for that long. But I live in the city, Baltimore City in Maryland, the state of Maryland.
mm,
And she lives closer to Washington, DC, but she lives in like a suburban area, cul-de-sac type of
yeah.
situation, like a McMansion type of thing. But it's only her living there because her child is grown and out of the house and whatnot. And it's just her and the dog. And I was there and it was like super quiet. This was also over I think this was over Christmas or something like that, maybe like right before. And no, like nobody's home on the block or anything like that. And I'm just not used to the quiet. I actually got
Mm,
like a little scared of how quiet it was because I can hear everything. You know, people going
yeah.
into houses, people going into their cars, if anybody's actually there. Um, the dog is not allowed to roam around the house like my dogs are here, which I'm pretty sure people who are listening can probably hear my dogs barking. Um, yeah, the dog's not allowed to roam around the house or anything like that at nighttime. So I'm like trying to listen out for him, but I also have TVs on because it's like I said, it's super quiet in the house. So yeah, it's just not really comfortable for me. Even though it's like this doesn't fit my lifestyle. Like I would love to have my own house, but at the
Sure. Yeah.
same time, it's like, you were in a house full of people, whereas like I wasn't. It was just me and this
Yeah.
dog that didn't really make any noise. So, you know, it was weird for me.
No,
So, I mean,
I hear you. Yeah.
it can be isolating. And again, like I don't know, Michael Bublé might have like a staff or something. I don't know. He might,
Oh, he's got a staff. You
yeah,
always see cars coming in and out.
yeah, he might have people living in those places and whatnot. He's got a wife and a bunch of kids too. But
Yeah.
yeah, it can be very isolating in a way. So I don't know, maybe it's something that you can put in Upkeep as well as the isolation of it, of not being able to have people come over, because then it's like if the house knows this person is bad, but maybe Adam doesn't know that,
Mm,
that would
yeah.
be pretty cool too. But yeah, I just wanted to bring up the fact that, I'm from the city as well, the urban versus suburban, and it it was very isolating in not a good way for me. Because it's like, and she has a dog that's illegal in her county.
Oh yeah.
So I couldn't walk the dog anywhere. I could only let him outside in her backyard, which is a huge backyard, but it's freezing outside. So
So
I
you can't even be social, which is the one thing you do with a dog is like you take it for walks, you meet people, you talk about other dogs, whatever. Like, yeah.
exactly. I can't do anything. Like I just have to be here in the house with the dog.
Yeah,
So
I haven't worked out the details yet, but there's going to be at least one issue where they're locked down for some reason. I haven't decided if it's a pandemic thing or if it's going to be like someone's on their tail and they need to like stay low for a bit.
mhm,
Uh, but I definitely want to have essentially like a lockdown issue, and they've been here for a year. They have not gone outside. It's great and all, but like they're losing it.
mhm,
Uh, which like I mean, really during COVID, like that was the story I think of so many people, like and like even in like the city and seeing people and stuff, like there was still such a degree of isolation that even if people, oh, you can see someone on Zoom, you can call someone, sure, yeah, we can call, we can text, we can whatever, but like there's something about like actual face-to-face human interaction that matters so much to people, and didn't realize until it was just like abruptly taken away from like a lot of people in the world, that you didn't realize like, hey, I kind of need this, like I need to see my friends, like I didn't think I need to see my friends, but I kind of do.
mhm,
That's definitely a theme I want to address in a future issue.
mhm,
I'm just trying to think the best way and the best time too, because when does this happen is one of those questions that I've been kind of cagey on. It could The first issue of Upkeep could take place now, or it could be 10 years ago. I haven't decided if I want to have it super close to real life events or not. If I want to be it's post pandemic or the pandemic happens during the story. I'm still playing around with that. It's not important for like the first issue because the same, like everything's too pricey. I can't afford anything. That was like an issue 10 years ago too. It's just way worse now because the numbers keep going up and the wages don't. So
yeah,
but yeah, that those are all interesting things that I've had to like to wrestle with because I want to make it a real world. Where Wardens, on the other hand, I was like, Wardens takes place in the summer of 1926. So like it's super specific. It takes place in like this block. There can be changes. You can have historical fiction, but like I know what's happening. I know the laws, like because Wardens like it's illegal like it's under prohibition at this time, but that changes next year or that starts to change next year. So like I've got a sense of the history to be like this is how this would fit in with everything. But Upkeep, I'm trying to keep it a little looser right now. I don't want to like tie myself to anything. Although I might have to pick something at one point, but I don't know. We'll see.
yeah. With my stuff, I had did one where it was like a rave. They were having a rave in an old warehouse, but the warehouse caught on fire. And then
Mm.
like 4 or 5 months later, that actually happened.
Oh, really?
Like not exactly, but it was like really close to what I actually wrote. Where it was like they had a rave in an abandoned warehouse that caught on fire and killed a bunch of people. I'm like, oh shit.
In
And
Belmore?
um, let's see what else happened. But I mean, something like that does happen. It's not so
Oh, yeah.
abstract. So if you do write something with the isolation or something that's similar to the pandemic, I mean, that was such a huge thing worldwide that it's like you really can't ignore it. So,
Yeah,
it's
that's why yeah, I'm trying to figure out like, do I make this if it's a post-pandemic thing, that's easy and you can just if you want to do another pandemic, it's a million things. There can always be another pandemic.
uh
Uh, but if you're like, this takes place in 2016, it's like, okay, well then by issue 4, you better be like dealing with COVID because, like if it's 1 year in advance. So like that's why I've been trying to like not I think it'll probably end up taking like starting to take place like now, which also raises the question, like if I get to issue 20 before 20 years in the future, do I have to deal with any of that? But no, I don't know. Everyone else seems to write stories. Like, not worry about this. So maybe I shouldn't worry about it so much.
Well, the last time we spoke, you took a risk starting a campaign after the new year. Do
That's
you
right.
feel the same way now that school is about to or has started, for many artists, whether they're parents and or students themselves? And how has starting a campaign now different? How's starting a campaign now different from when you did it after the new year?
It's kind of hard to say because it's still pretty early days. I mean, and also like this is one of those stories that I tell a lot of people. They say, "Oh, that's a cool premise," or "That's interesting," or that like they resonate with it. That doesn't necessarily mean someone's going to back it on day one, you know. And I'm like, this is day one right now, so I've had I don't know like seven or something like backers, like not a lot. I know
Mhm.
everyone on the list, you know, either personally or through social media, or they're part of like the broader comic group I'm involved with. Like I'm not coming out the gate being like 100 backers first day, like, and I didn't expect that just because I know just sort of where I am in my comics, comics career. I'm not the most popular person just in terms of like raw numbers, even though you got stories to tell, and hopefully you'll get there someday, right? But in terms of like, is this better or how does this compare to Wardens? I really try to think these things as like marathons and not sprints. So like it kind of doesn't matter how you start, it sort of matters how you finish.
Mhm.
So it's hard to compare. But I don't know. I picked this because Wardens I was doing in February, and I was like, this makes sense for about half a year. Too close to Wardens, and you telling people like, hey, I just had a Kickstarter 3 months ago. Want to back another one? And they're like, no, too soon. Like it's just almost the feeling of that. And then if it's too long, then it kind of can. I like if it's ready, it's ready. I don't want to hold back on a comic that's been ready.
Mhm.
So it just sort of I set this date to be about 6 months from Wardens, and also it's Fan Expo this weekend in Toronto. So I'm having for the first 5 days of I guess the Kickstarter launch, I'm doing a Fan Expo discount on a digital copy and the physical copy plus bonuses. So there's like a little bit that's off. So I'm gonna go to Fan Expo and hand out a bunch of like I made these little like postcard flyers. Whoops, that have this like a little QR code at the back. You can scan it. Uh, and yeah, like I'm just hoping to like just like hit the bricks and just like literally put things in people's hands and be like, this is what it's about, and just like get people excited. I don't think a bunch of people are necessarily gonna go home and like back it right away, but who knows? Maybe they might, if more people you talk to. So I tried to time it with that a little bit. I mean, that was one of the main reasons for doing it now, just because like the weekend's coming up and lots of people are going to be here and they're going to be all there and talking about comics and stuff. And I made the decision not to present there because the Kickstarter campaign wasn't ready. So I also had to decide like, do I want to apply to be at this like large and frankly like, quite expensive like Fan Expo. I think it's like $600 to table there or something like that. Like these things aren't cheap.
Yeah.
You have to like you got to be ready if you want to
Uh-huh.
do that. Like you have to have like copies. I'm not gonna go table at a place and be like, hey, promise to buy my thing. Like no, I'm gonna be there with like books to be like, I made a thing, it worked. Here, you can buy all the ones I didn't sell before, or you can buy the second run or whatever of like, of Wardens if I have to do a second run of printing. So those are the kind of considerations I had. But at the end of the day, I just sort of like, I just figured you just got to pick something and do it because like I I'm definitely the kind of person who like will over analyze this to death and try to be like, what's the advantage of doing it like starting it on a Wednesday versus a Tuesday? And I'm like, I don't have time for that. I'm like, I've got like a family, I've got a job, I've got like my other complete like side hustle, writing all these comics and like making these things and like the graphic stuff. And I have physical house renovations. I've been like, I'm here in my basement. I put this back to all these books back on here last night because my basement flooded a month ago.
Oh.
No, note to self: don't keep your comics. Note to self: note to anybody who's listening: don't keep your comics in a cardboard box in the corner that you have water issues. Uh, that was a tactical mistake on my part. So like, yeah, that's a whole thing. So, but anyway, like, I've got lots of shit going on. So I was like, fine, I'm just gonna pick this weekend. We're gonna do it. It's about 2 months off from Wardens. Makes sense, I guess. And we'll see. Maybe it'll be a giant disaster. Maybe it'll be a success. Maybe it'll be, you know, good enough and succeed and sets me up for the next one. We'll find out.
Mm-hmm. It'll be a success. It'll work out.
I hope so. It's a lot of like experimentation.
Uh-huh.
What here's one. Can I give you one tip for anyone out there who wants to
Yeah.
do a Kickstarter campaign? Okay, so I hate linking to like a long Kickstarter URL.
Mhm.
So what I did is I registered the domain upkeepcomic.com, and then I just have that domain forward to whatever I want to. So for this Kickstarter, if you go to upkeepcomic.com, that will immediately go to the Kickstarter account, and you can like click yay back or whatever, or just check it out. And the next time I'm doing another thing, I'll just forward it to the next Kickstarter account. So I have this sort of like a static web page that just points to whatever I want it to point to, uh,
Mhm.
which I'm going to do the next time I do Warden. So like even little things like that, like figuring it out and like getting a QR code on a thing that's like scans goes to upkeepcomic.com. And then from there, you can point to a preview page, you can point it to your own page, you can point it to, I could even just point it to like the digital comic at some point if I want, be like, hey, this will just, you can just read the comic online. Here it is, you could do any of that. I mean, you have to like, register accounts and know how to do all that, but I've been doing that for other stuff anyway. So I figured, like, I just had a flash of inspiration. I was like, I'm not asking people to remember like long ass like things. Like, here's one web URL. So like, it's the third time I've done a Kickstarter campaign. I thought of that for this one. I think it's a good idea. I'm gonna do it for for Wardens. I'll probably register whatever wardenscomic.com or something like that. It's a small, relatively small ongoing cost considering the amount that it actually costs to make these things, which is like fairly non-trivial because you have to pay artists and colorists and letterers and editors and pay to get it printed and the whole thing. So, but yeah, it's every time I do this, I learn something new. So, that's my goal is to keep learning and, you know, keep writing.
Yeah, that's a good thing. But all right, is there anything else that you wanted to share about Upkeep? Maybe rewards for potential backers?
Yeah, so rewards are pretty tight this time compared to some other rewards. I decided I didn't want to have. So here's one of the big questions: is when you launch a Kickstarter campaign, do you have a big reward or not? And if so, what do you offer? So with Wardens, we offered for I think it was like $90, and then we had another reward that was like 100 something. These are Canadian, so like they're actually not that much, like for an American, like relative to the amount that like some people ask for stuff. We had like custom art. And my guy did amazing art sketches of people. They were really good. They're really funny because he's a kind of humorist as well. Like anything he draws, he like tries to put some funny stuff in there, and that was great. But for Upkeep, I decided I'm going to try to do something and just keep it totally simple. No high tier rewards. The only rewards are there's the digital reward, which is digital comic, the physical comic, and there's the physical comic. Plus, I made 3 postcards that have different stuff on the front and a little thing on the back about Garrison Manor or whatever, and 4 trading cards. I've been doing these trading cards since I guess the first comic I did, Awakening, and I just keep doing them. I love making these little things. People have them. You stick them as bookmarks or whatever. So it's going to have like digital or not going to have it had it the rewards are digital, plain physical, and physical plus extras, and
Mhm.
that's it. And this is a complete experiment to see if that's good, because I figure the people who are going to want to put more, like friends of family, like my mom, that kind of thing, they'll probably just donate more. Like they don't need an excuse to be like, oh, I'll only give $30. If they want to give another $30 or whatever, they can give another $30. There's the add extra thing. The people who I think would typically put in a higher reward might just use the donation thing to do it, so you don't actually have to like have uh, a deliverable. But most people don't want an extra large deliverable because most people aren't backing an indie comic, number one for like over $100. Like that's just not how most people do it. Like it's great when someone does it, but I don't expect most people to do it. So I didn't really sweat about sweat the like the big rewards a lot. I
Mhm.
did a lot of like research into my previous campaigns to see what was working, what wasn't working, what people bought, what they didn't buy. Try to break it down by like also by location and stuff. Uh, there's a lot there's like no end of analysis you can do, like no end to the analysis you can do for these things. But this is a pure experiment, no massive rewards, just the comic, digital, physical, and then comic plus some extra goodies. If you really like it, that's it. And so I'm trying to keep my, essentially basically what I'm trying to do is keep my costs and my overhead and my effort and my reliance on other people, like asking, hey, artist, are you done doing the thing, for the people? Like, I don't have to bug an artist to like, do a sketch, because that's not on the table anymore. So we'll see how it goes. I mean, it's going to be different. The amount I'm asking for is less than Warden's. I think Warden's, it was like 4,000 Canadian. This is 2,500. That's representative, not of my confidence of the comic, but of the size of it. This comic is 40, Warden's is 44 pages, where this is 24 pages. So I feel like it's probably ask a little less, even though this comic actually cost more to make than Warden's, a significant amount more to make, because Warden's was just me and one other guy. He did the art and the colors, and I did the lettering. Where Upkeep, I decided I wanted to outsource everything, because I wanted a different feel for the colors than the artist I had. I wanted a different style of lettering than the one I was initially would have done myself. Who knows? Maybe I'll do lettering myself in another one. But a lot of experimentation. That's all.
I mean, it can't hurt to keep it simple, and so especially nowadays with the cost of everything and housing, so that can help
Yeah, I
out.
was like, yeah, here's 3 options. If you do it fast, you get a discount on 2 of them. That's it. If you like it, if you're into the story, that's it. I'm selling a comic. I'm not here to like sell toys.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you mentioned you'll be at Fan Expo. This you said it was this weekend, right?
It's this Saturday I'm going. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
I'm
this
gonna.
episode will be out afterwards, so sorry about that, everybody. But will you be at any other cons this year? And where can people find you online? All right.
I don't know. I mean, I might pop on some other things. I don't have anything scheduled that I'm going to go to. But never say never. Online, people can find me at arigross.ca. That's ARIGROSS.ca. And you can check out Upkeep at upkeepcomic.com, UPKEEP comic.com. It's what it sounds like. No mystery there. Yeah, I'm also on Instagram at College Street Comics. I think it's college_st_comics. I'm not a massive social media person. It is? Yeah, okay, good. I was after I can guess myself. I've been trying to post on social media. I'm just to like get in the habit of it. It's my instinct is to have like face-to-face interactions with people. And so for me, social media has just never really panned out as a thing I do for long. I get into a thing and then I get over a thing. I was on Twitter until last month, and I decided I just couldn't be on Twitter anymore. A lot of people can. No, not blaming them, but I was like, yeah, I'm out.
Okay.
So yeah.
What I started doing, especially when I got back on the gaming, is planned posts. So if you can do that, I would recommend, especially so with the campaign, you want to keep the momentum going. Just plan them out. So if you want to do like a batch of content and just do them like maybe at this time of day, I do mine like I'll do it both on Instagram and TikTok. And they're already in my drafts, and they'll go out, I guess, when most people are on their phones, which is usually right after they get to work,
Mm.
during lunch, and when they get home. So around like maybe 6, 7, maybe 8 o'clock. A lot of people are on there before they go
Yeah.
to bed at night.
Mornings,
So
lunch, evenings. Yeah.
yeah, so that's when I'll post them again in batches and just let it go and not worry about it anymore. Not trying to keep up with it because it's exhausting. So yeah, I would recommend anybody listening or to you,
Mm.
just do if you can. I think you can only do that if you have a lot of followers and if you have a business account, which Solo Nerd is a business account. So
Yeah, I tried. I forget what I used. I think for Wardens I was like planning posts and batching things and stuff like that. And it got good for a bit, but I found that it's just for me, I almost found that like sometimes I wanted to do a different thing, or I felt like I had to do a different thing than what I planned. It was kind of like I thought I had it all planned out. Then in the implementation, I was like, I don't want to post that right now. I'll post that later. And I was like, I fiddle with it too much. But I mean, it worked out, so it was all good in the end, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you again to creator and writer Ari Gross for joining us here today to promote the first issue of his new comic series, Upkeep, now live on Kickstarter until September 15th. That is a Sunday. But it may be over the Saturday before.
It's probably over at like 12:01 Sunday morning.
Morning.
Yeah.
I don't think anybody's gonna be up then.
Yeah.
So, but all of Ari's socials, as he's mentioned, and his website will be listed in this episode's details alongside a Kickstarter link for those who are interested. Again, I'm Candace Garner, and you've been listening to the Solo Nerd Bird podcast. Thank you.
Thank you.